going to go ahead and get started. We've got a lot to talk about today, so we expect a pretty full hour and a half here, but I'm also, for those of you who don't know me, pretty laid back. So if you have questions or anything comes up along the way, feel free to put things in the chat or interject. You can unmute. This is meant to be engaging, and it's not meant to be me talking at you or lecturing you. So I want this to be something that benefits you and whatever you need. So we're going to start out by talking about clearing your head. And basically what I mean by that is mindfulness and practices for mindfulness and how they can help you study. Then we're going to go into some stuff about study strategies, note-taking. That'll probably be the bulk of what we talk about today, just different ways to make sure that you are using your study time effectively and kind of emphasizing the importance of studying. And then we'll end by talking about test anxiety and some test taking strategies, whether you experience anxiety or not. So I want to kind of add a little asterisk to this and say that I am not a counselor. I am not a psychiatrist. I'm not licensed to do any of this. So I'm going to be giving you some tips and suggestions, but anxiety is a real thing, and there are people who can help you and provide you with tools that, I can't. So on that note, I wanted to introduce y'all to Ayla. She is one of our counselors here at Wenatchee Valley College, and I'm going to give her an opportunity to tell you a little bit about the services that she offers and that WVC offers for counseling.
Thank you so much. Yes, anxiety is real, and there are a lot of professionals out there that are here to support you all. I am one of those professionals that is here on campus. My name is Ayla, and I'm a new counselor in Wenatchee Valley College. And prior to working at Wenatchee, I was working out in the community. So I am a licensed mental health counselor and have experience with working with folks who experience depression, anxiety, trauma, relationship issues, self-esteem, and we talk a lot about mindfulness. So I wanted to take a couple of minutes today to tell you a little bit about the counseling services that we provide here at Wenatchee Valley College and show you how to book an appointment with one of the counselors available if you are interested in doing so. So I am going to be sharing my screen. That way you all can become familiar with the counseling website. And it is on the Wenatchee Valley College website under students. And then from there, you go to support services. And then right down here is counseling. So not only does the counseling department offer personal counseling, but we also offer academic counseling, career counseling, and we are also taking on the access. So if you have any sort of disability, whether it's learning or a mental health disability, you can come in contact with us. We also provide students with emergency funding. So if you're running low or you don't have money to pay your rent, if you're struggling with gas money, if you need money for your books or other kind of technological needs, we can get you connected to some funds that we do have available. We also have the Night's Cupboard Food Pantry, which is pretty much a food bank that is on campus and available for students. All you need is your student ID to come and access the food bank. And we are open every Thursday from 12 to 3. Or you can give us a call if that time or day doesn't work for you, and we'll be able to give you access to the food pantry. We also have a student support group that's currently meeting via Zoom, and we're hoping to get that started, hopefully like a hybrid version where we do in person and over Zoom. But that's every Monday from 12 to 2 p.m. We also have some community resources available on our website. And then right here is how to make an appointment. And pretty much all you do is you click on this link, book an appointment with a counselor, and it'll take you to our bookings page. And from there, it'll show you all the kinds of services that we provide, right? So career counseling, academic advising, that emergency fund. If you want to explore any other resources, whether it's on campus or out in the community, we can also help you with that. We also help students who are doing academic appeals. So if you're not doing well with your classes and there's a hold on your account, we can help with that. And then the personal counseling as well. And then down here, you'll click on whichever one you want. And then you can choose who you want to work with. There's 3 counselors on campus. So it's myself, Ryan, and Berta. And if you have a preference, you could choose a person. And if not, you could say anyone. And then you could choose what time and day works best for you. So it's pretty convenient. And I'll actually show you all so right under our counseling, it shows you our staff information. That way you can see a picture of all of us. Sometimes people feel more comfortable if they can see who they're going to be meeting with, especially when it comes to counseling. But on here too, it also has resources, which will tell you information. And I don't know why my computer's being slow, but there we are. This tells you resources about crisis. So if you're having any kind of crisis, any thoughts about suicide, a sexual assault, domestic violence, it gives you information on resources out in the community, gives you information on housing. So if you're experiencing homelessness or likely to experience homelessness, you could contact those organizations or contact us as well. And then more information on different community food banks. And then just last thing, yeah, that way y'all can see who we are. So this is Berta, Ryan, myself, and then Lucero, who's also part of our counseling team, and she works with mostly foster youth, but she also helps facilitate a lot of our appointments and our scheduling. So let me stop sharing and see what questions y'all have. Nothing.
The food bank, I just wanted to point out too, like you have diapers, right? Like that. So sometimes people don't know that, but and personal hygiene items and stuff like that as well. So
I'm so glad you said that. Yes, we do have like toothbrush, toothpaste, feminine products. We have diapers, wipes. We have baby bottles and pacifiers, things like that. We also have Domino's gift cards that gives you 1 free medium pizza. So there's a lot of cool things in there. And we just got a lot of cool food because we just did a food drive. So there's a lot of really yummy stuff in there.
And does the student have to like establish need, or is it just like it's open for all WVC students?
Yep. Yeah, we don't ask any questions as long as you're a current student and you have your student ID with you or your student number, you should be good. Well, I'm so thankful that y'all gave me a little bit of your time today. Don't hesitate to reach out to me or to Jenna. Or now that you're familiar with our counseling website, you can see our contact information there. Have fun with your presentation today.
Thank you, Ayla. We appreciate it. Okay. So let me get this back up here. Okay. So again, if you want to get in touch with Ayla, we do have her information here. So if you are viewing this later or looking at the slides, you can always pull up her information. But again, you can look at their website as well. So we're going to go ahead and get started by talking about clearing your headspace. And again, like I said before, what I mean by this is practicing mindfulness. So when I say the word mindfulness, what comes to mind for you? Positive or negative, what things does this make you think of?
I feel like positiveness is, kind of being like mindful of people. I don't know if that makes sense. You kind of looking at people and seeing kind of what they're, or even yourself, just kind of trying to take care of I guess yourself or somebody else, but being thoughtful about it.
Yeah, that's a great way of explaining it. Absolutely. I love that.
I'd say like being calm and like intentional, just like, yeah, being aware of what you're doing.
Yeah, that's definitely reflective of my definition of mindfulness anyway. Does anyone have any negative thoughts that come up when you think of mindfulness? Or does it make you feel a certain way, positive or negative?
I mean, kind of like, I guess in a sense, if you had like a lot to do, you'd have your mind full, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah, okay. In the chat, we have prudent and thoughtful. I like that. That's good. Yeah, so I'll be honest. When I first heard about mindfulness, I had kind of, I guess the reason I was asking about negativity is because I had kind of a negative perspective on mindfulness. I was kind of judgy about it. Traditionally, in Western culture, mindfulness is kind of thought of as something that's for cisgendered white women who are middle class or upper class. It's kind of the stigma that goes around what mindfulness is in the practice. But obviously that's not true. Everybody can be mindful. It's not just for certain people. But not everybody realizes the ways in which they are already being mindful and the ways that they can be a bit more intentional about it. So that's what we're going to talk about briefly today. Before I get into that, I am actually going to have us practice being mindful for a minute here. So if you're skeptical, if you're not a person who likes to do this kind of thing, just bear with me for a minute here. But we're going to take a moment to kind of just relax and focus on being mindful. So get into a comfortable position, kind of put things down. If you want to close your eyes, you can. You don't have to if you don't want to. If you're sitting down, shift so that your feet are both on the floor. I know I never do that. Rest your hands next to your side or in your lap and just kind of sit comfortably. So let go of any to-do list or anything you've got on your mind. I know we all have things we need to get to or things we're thinking about doing later today, but for this presentation and for the next little while, just let it go. It's still going to be there when we're done today. Your tasks are still going to be on your calendar or, on your phone, whatever you've got, but just let them go for the next hour to hour and a half. In a minute here, I'm going to ask you to take a deep breath, hold it, and then release. It's okay if you make noise with this. You don't have to be self-conscious unless you're somewhere, where you feel judged, but you're going to take a deep breath, hold it, and then release slowly as much air as you can. Okay. So inhale, hold, and let it out. One more time. Inhale, hold, let it out. Okay. When you're ready, if you have your eyes closed, you can open them back up. And we're going to move on to the next part of the presentation. So how do you feel? Positive, negative, same?
I feel relaxed.
Relaxed?
Calm.
Calm. Okay. So the reason that I had you try this is actually because I had an instructor that had me do this when I was in college. And I was very skeptical of this kind of thing. I was very science focused, for those of you who don't know, neuroscience was kind of my thing for a long time. Kind of more of like the scientific parts of psychology. So I had a neuroscience teacher in this big lecture hall, and he would start every class by having us do an exercise like what we just did. And at first I was like, for real? Is this really what we're doing right now? But because it didn't, I don't know, maybe I'm more skeptical than most of you, but I was pretty judgy. But I found that over time, doing this before attending a class or taking notes or studying, just spending 1 to 2 minutes to tell myself to focus on the material really helped. I was able to let go of all the things. If I had a to-do list, I would just jot it down real quick and be like, okay, I'll deal with it after class. I don't have to think about it. I don't have to hold on to it. And it turns out there's a reason for all that. My neuroscience teacher knew what he was doing, obviously. There's a lot of research out there that tells us that mindfulness works. And some of the most, I mean, you can find a lot if you like to read research, if that's something fun you like to do like I do. But a couple of stories I want to highlight. There was a research study that is especially relevant to students. So they did this a while ago, 2013, but it's still relevant. They had a group of students divided up where half of them took a mindfulness course for 2 weeks before taking the GRE, which is the graduate record exam. It's kind of like the SATs for grad school. They had everybody take the test first. Half of them took this mindfulness training, and then everybody took it again. And the students who did the mindfulness training not only scored higher when the other group didn't, they scored the same, but they felt better. They reported that they remembered things better. They were able to focus and less distracted. And just in general, across the board, they performed significantly better. This was a research result that they could point to and say, yes, this makes a difference. So that's pretty cool. I mean, that's relevant to what you guys are going through with testing. And there's a lot of research that supports that it doesn't just change your attitude, it is changing the way that your brain is arranging itself. And everything changes our brain. Our environment changes where our neurons fire and all that stuff. But there's lots of research that shows us that different brain areas involved with problem solving, adapting, and self-regulation can be improved with people who practice mindfulness. And there's clear evidence you can see with brain scans that it makes a difference. So basically, if you're not a sciencey person, and if what I just said sounds like a bunch of gibberish, what I'm trying to say is that mindfulness works, and we have a lot of research to support it. So being mindful when you are studying is really going to help you remember things better and handle your anxiety better.
And how do you practice being mindfulness? Like, what are the strategies behind the practice?
That's a great question.
Mindful?
Yeah, that's a really good question. That's actually what I was going to talk about next. So thank you for asking that, Maria. There are a lot of ways you can practice being mindful. So of course there's meditation, which we kind of did a little snippet of just a minute ago. It was a breathing meditation exercise. So you can meditate, but there are lots of other things that you probably already do that are mindful that you can make a bit more intentional. So practicing guided meditation, like breathing exercises like we just did, you can look into learning about mantras. That's a thing where you repeat something over and over. Yoga is traditionally something that was kind of created as a mindful practice. So yoga can be very meditative. And there's lots of visual techniques. So things like this here, focusing on one thing and just kind of letting yourself focus on that one object or item or thought can really help you be mindful.
You know,
one thing I like to do, oh, go ahead.
Do you know where we can locate those, like what you just demonstrated right now on the screen?
This one I actually found in a program called Canva. It is free. It has like different graphics and things to create like visual stuff like Instagram posts and stuff like that, but they actually have some of these fun animations.
That's interesting.
Yeah. And there are some tools online. Usually if you will, you can Google it. They'll have YouTube videos that are often just like something that's calming and moving. Watching water, like waves and things like that has kind of a similar effect. But I'm happy to look into some resources. And if I find others, I will let you know, because that's a great question.
Thank you.
Yeah. But like I was saying, you don't have to practice actual meditation. So these things are meditation exercises but you probably do things that are mindful anyway. It's just putting a little bit more intention behind it. So if you were coloring or drawing or painting or knitting or any of that stuff that kind of keeps your hands busy, if you can focus on that or just focus on a thought while you're doing it, you're being mindful of what you're doing. It gives you an opportunity to focus in on something and kind of let your brain relax a little bit and allow yourself to have attention on that one thing that you're doing. Going for a walk, if that's something that you're able to do, is another really great way, or just getting out in nature. Even though I know like right now it's kind of drizzly and rainy, but if you can just go stand outside and be in nature for a minute and take a moment to kind of reflect on the fact that you're standing out in nature, it can kind of help you connect and feel calm and mindful. And one of the absolute best things I can suggest is treat yourself to some screen-free time. It's hard right now. I know that technology is wonderful, and I'm not telling you not to use technology. I know that we need screens. I know that that's how a lot of us are learning and communicating, and there's a lot of benefits. I'm not trying to bash technology here, but give yourself a break, because your brain has a lot of information to process. We're not really built for this kind of information, this much information. So, 5 minutes, just 5 minutes where you put your phone in the other room, turn off all the screens, and just have a quiet moment to yourself. Maybe write something by hand, or just sit for a couple minutes, or focus on your breathing. Just do something where you're not looking at a screen, and do it deliberately for even just a couple minutes. It might feel like an eternity. It might really, if you're bored. But I think you'll notice a difference in your quality of life and your ability to focus. So in general, what I'm trying to say is just practice doing one thing at a time. I know our society kind of favors multitasking. Multitasking, I'm going to argue, is not really real. It's more task switching. You're switching between things quickly, but you're not really necessarily doing things well. We can talk about that in a different presentation, or you can argue with me, come at me, it's fine. But really focus on one thing at a time. Just practice that, once a day or a couple times a week or something like that, and just give yourself a break to kind of practice focusing. Teach yourself how to focus on important information. Another thing I want to add, without lecturing anyone, is that your physical space makes a huge difference on your mental space. So if you're putting all this effort into tidying up your mental space, do yourself a favor and make sure your physical space matches that. I know that a lot of us don't live alone, right? We live with other people. We don't have a total control over everything all the time. And it's hard to keep up with everything all the time. But make a space for yourself that you can keep and maintain and focus on being a spot where you can focus on schoolwork and study. And maybe that's not at your home. Maybe that's going somewhere and knowing, okay, I'm going to go and this is my study space. But clean out a corner of your room, or make sure that a room in your house or apartment or whatever is generally tidy, or at least clean up an area. Spend a few minutes to tidy up your space and be intentional, because it's going to help set up, the mental framework for you to be successful. But I want to add, I have been a student myself. It is very easy to fall into a rabbit hole of cleaning and using that as an excuse to procrastinate. If you have a big paper
Yes.
due, what was that?
That is true.
Yeah, definitely been there.
Yes, it happens to me often.
It's hard. It's hard. You get on a roll and you're finally productive about the one thing you've been putting off. And we're
Yes.
fueled by avoiding something we should be doing.
That is very true.
Yeah.
Inevitable.
What was that?
And yes, that is very true.
So just be
Inevitable.
mindful of that. Just be aware of, if you are tidying up, where's the line? Are you doing it because you're trying to make your environment better? You don't have to devote hours and hours to making your apartment perfectly clean, or your bedroom or your house, or wherever you are. But just, a few minutes to tidy up, kind of find that balance.
Yes, it's inevitable, especially I have 2 daughters.
Yeah.
And they're young and they make a mess. They know how to get dirty. When it comes to cleaning, Okay, that's something that they need to work on. So
Yeah,
yes,
and like
I can relate.
it's so much harder when you have other people, especially when they're your children. So you have so much to keep up with. It's hard to keep up
Yes,
with
I
yourself.
have 2 daughters and a roommate.
Yeah, so that's a lot.
Yes.
But if you can find a space that even if it's not clean all the time, that you can make clean, or tidy, it doesn't have to be super clean, but just somewhere where you can focus, kitchen table or corner of your room or something. Just that's your space that you get to work with, or somewhere outside. Like I was saying, maybe not in your house, maybe it's coming to campus and studying in the library, or wherever you're comfortable.
Yes. Thank you.
Yeah. So we're going to pause here for a minute because I want to see what suggestions you all have for how you either already are mindful or how you could be. So this link here I put in the chat is to something called Jamboard. Some of you who have been to presentations with me before are probably familiar with it because I like to use it. But I'm going to give a quick rundown real quick as soon as I share my screen so that you can see how this works. Are we seeing the Jamboard here? Cool. Okay. So one key thing to remember is that everybody who has this link has access to edit. So that means that you can impact other people's things. So please be respectful of others. If someone types in an idea and you have the same idea, it's okay to have duplicates up here. Don't edit other people's stuff. You can move it around or, things like that, but please be respectful of what other people are trying to say. There's lots of cool tools over here you can play with if you want. There's pens and there's a text box. You can do shapes and things, but what I'm going to recommend you focus on is making a sticky note. So that's this one right here. And in the sticky note, it will expand or contract based on what you type. So you can type a fair amount if you want to, but you can also just put little things in there. So let's say how I clear my head is going on a walk. You just type in your sticky note. You can change the color if you want and save it, and it's going to show up there. You can move it around. You can make it bigger or smaller. You can double click on it to change the color again. And then you can always add more. So I just want us to take a minute or two here to think about how you clear your head and ways that you can, share with others. Going on a drive. Yeah, that's one of my favorite ways too. Not very fuel efficient, especially right now. I don't know if that's the greatest idea, but it's one of my favorite things to do too. Awesome. Classical music, going on a hike, watching a movie. Webtoons, I love it. Calling my mom, awesome. Yeah, these are great. Strolling through the makeup aisle. That's a good one. All right, so the kind of the theme that I'm seeing here, some of them are, physical, going on a hike, even strolling through the makeup aisle is just kind of moving around, not really having to put too much thought into what you're doing, except for maybe some fun stuff you want to get. Going on a drive, kind of giving yourself a chance to just be out there, watching things, talking to people that you care about. These are all great ways to clear your head. So if you haven't tried being mindful previously, I recommend just giving it a try. It doesn't have to be, dramatic. I think that there's benefits to mindfulness practices like the breathing exercises that we did. But it can just be doing something intentionally. So if you don't have, if you don't want to do the practice that we talked about, then you can always try something that you are already doing, but just do it with a bit more intention and for a purpose to kind of clear your head. I'm seeing more pop up on the Jamboard. That's awesome. Feel free to continue on there. We're going to go ahead and jump to the next section, which is the study strategies. And this is kind of the bulk of what I wanted to talk about today. So when I talk about studying, I'm not talking about reading. Reading can be part of studying, but they aren't the same thing. Doing your homework, reading before class, even just reading your notes afterwards, that is not the same as studying. Again, it can be part of it, but they're not exactly the same. So when I talk about studying, what I mean is devoting your attention and your time to understanding something. So that is something where you're engaging with the material, you're thinking about it, you are creating examples for yourself, you're trying to reframe things and understand them. So you're kind of already working with something that you've already read or written down or things like that, but it's not just reading things again or just, reading your notes. They are kind of separate things. So studying is interesting. And there's lots of reasons why this works. And one of the most important ways, I think, comes from some research that we heard about almost like 150 years ago. And this research still stands. So there was a German psychologist, his name was Ebbinghaus, and he studied memory and forgetting. And in his research, he learned that we forget things really quickly. So a lot of researchers have updated this and added to this, but the basic idea still stays the same. So this here is called the Ebbinghaus forgetting curve. It's a lot of information here. I'm going to walk you through it. So basically, when you attend class, you probably retain something around 75% of what you're learning. There's a lot of information coming at you. You're most likely not retaining 100% of what is happening. If you're taking effective notes, you're engaged in class, you're listening, you're still probably at the end of class going to be at about 75%. So if you attend class and then just walk away, 10 minutes later, there's a good chance you forgot most of what you just learned. You're down to 40%. A day later, you're down to 20%. So if you're not studying, if you just go to class and then move on, you're this blue line here. So after a week or a month, what was the point? Why did you go to class? You didn't learn anything. You're not holding on to it. But if you review information regularly, you can change this. If you can review information right after class, you can retain most of the information you just learned because you're reviewing it. So if you took effective notes or, watched a video and have some notes on that or slides or whatever you used, when you go back and look at it, you can retain way more because you remember some of the information you just learned, and then you can add on those extra pieces that you forgot. So reviewing after class is one of the best things you can do. It's a really great strategy if you have time. I know sometimes, especially when you're on campus, it's hard to, travel between locations if you have one after another. But if you don't, if you're taking classes at home, take 5 minutes after class just to look over and kind of debrief on what you just learned. But again, if you only review it once, you're going to end up kind of falling off and forgetting again because doing it briefly after class doesn't really stick with you. So if you do it after class, a few minutes later, you're going to be pretty set. The next day, you're still doing pretty okay. But if you don't review it again, it's just going to kind of drop off again. But if you keep reviewing it, that's what these different lines are here, you're going to retain the information better and longer. So if you're reviewing it the next day and then a week later or a few days later and a month later, this information is going to be stuff that you actually know. You don't have to keep reviewing it. It becomes information that you have access to it. So this is pretty powerful, I think. Remembering, this is the whole reason to study. Like if you are going to class and attending lectures and you're not following up and you're not reading notes again, why did you go? Why are you in college? You can go and you can still retain some information, but you really want to do yourself a favor and review the information so that it sticks with you longer and get your money's worth. Because even if you're not directly paying out of pocket, somebody's paying for you to be here through grants or scholarships or loans or out of your pocket. You know, you've got lots of things, make it worth the time and effort. So how do we study? There's lots of different ways. I wish I could tell you a formula, but everybody's different. And I mean, by everybody, I mean instructors too. So your biology class is probably going to mean you'll have to study differently than you do for your math class. And maybe your English 101 teacher requires totally different information than your English 201 teacher. So everything is going to be different, which makes it a little bit hard to keep up with. But you will find strategies and tools through trying them out. So the more that you experiment with things, you know, kind of getting a feel for what type of information and types of ways that you should be reviewing things, you will get a better feel for effective studying for your class. So one way you can study is with flashcards. This is kind of a traditional one. Flashcards can be hit or miss. So if you're just making information, you know, just definitions and cards, and you're not really engaging with it much or using it much, then it's not really going to help you out. And maybe in some classes like math, this might not be super helpful. It might be helpful for memorizing formulas or things like that, but you know, it's not for every class. If you are making flashcards, this is really helpful for things where you need to memorize terms or learning a foreign language. So these are really useful for that. If you can interact with the cards while you're making them, you're going to make more, you're going to give them more value. So if you can draw on them or create cues or things that help you build different connections to these things, it's going to help you learn that information better. And use them. If you make the cards, if you put in the effort and put in the time, actually take the time to test yourself or have other people test you, which can be totally different. You can have people test you by showing you, you can have people test you by reading. You know, this is one of the reasons that we have a tutor is he's here to help you. So if you don't have someone in a class or something like that, find somebody who can help and who can, you know, quiz you and kind of hold you accountable. Another method is concept or mind mapping. They're both very similar. I don't tend to recommend this for taking notes in the moment during class because it can be kind of complicated, but it's a really great way to review your information later and understand, you know, what you do and don't know. I'll give an example of what a mind map looks like in a little bit here. And then self-testing. So quizzing yourself, create your own questions. When you're reading things, think about how an instructor would phrase that. What kind of question could they pull out of that information? And then usually they have practice questions in the book. The end of a section, the end of a book, your instructor might have practice questions. See if you can answer those. And then teaching is one of the best ways to learn. So if you can explain the concept or idea to somebody else, then you probably have a pretty good understanding of it. If you can't, you might need to figure out how to fill in those gaps. So take a classmate or our tutor or somebody that you can sit down and be like, okay, can I explain this to you and see, you know, kind of work it out and see if you are understanding the concept correctly. And if not, maybe they can kind of help you bounce the ideas, you know, back and forth. So one of the most important things when you're studying is to make meaningful connections. And what I mean by this is have the information be relevant to you in some way and anchor it to something you already know or care about. So in this ridiculous example, if you read a fact like rats are illegal in Alberta, Canada, if you want to remember this fact, you need to anchor it to something you already know. For me, for those of you who know me, I love rats. I've got pet rats. I'm an unusual person in that way. Rats mean a lot to me. So I read a fact like this, and because I have such a history with rats, I'm like, no, and I remember this fact. It anchors to all these things about my personality. But if you don't have strong feelings about rats one way or the other, you know, maybe if they destroy your home or you've had them on your farm or you've seen rats and had some traumatic experience, maybe this also sticks with you. But if you've never interacted with rats, you don't really care. You don't know anybody who lives in Canada. You're kind of like, okay, whatever. Then you might not remember this fact or this piece of information. So you need to come up with ways to make it matter to you. So one of the ways to do that is to make yourself some anchor points. And what I mean by anchor points is those pieces of your personality or information you already know that you can tie it back to like it's an anchor. For me, it's my love of rats. I know that, so I can tie facts and information about rats to it, or anything that's kind of related. If you don't have anything, if you don't know other content from other classes that's similar, or you don't have anything you care about, ask some questions and find answers, because that process of finding answers is going to help you find something you can hold on to. You know, are rats dangerous? Like, why are they illegal? Ask these questions and find the answers, kind of dig a little bit deeper. And if you can dig deeper and find those reasons, it's going to have some meaning to you. Maybe you had hamsters as a kid and you're like, well, I kind of remember that. Did they allow hamsters in Alberta, Canada? Like, you know, you can kind of find those connections that way. So this example is ridiculous, of course, because who needs to know this fact? But even with facts that you come across in different classes or different pieces of information that you need to remember, find a way to make it meaningful to you and connect it to some other information that you know or something that's important to you. So we're talking about things other than notes. We're going to kind of shift our gears here a little bit, but I want to pause for a minute and ask, do you take notes? Who takes notes? You raise your hand. Yeah. Caesar and Natalie. I can't see.
I do.
Everybody. Okay, perfect. What do you do with your notes? Do you, when you're done with them, do you review them later? Do you reread them? What do you do with your notes once you've taken them?
I like to make a summary out of them and, like you say, test myself on what I know, like flip the page and kind of try to rewrite what I wrote on it. Like memorize it, I guess. I don't know, something like that. And then
Gotcha.
just
Yeah.
make sure that they're organized. I'll sometimes reorganize them, and that helps me remember it, because then I got to keep writing it again.
Awesome. Anybody else?
I do take notes because, you know, I like to refer back to them and organize my thoughts, as well as try to find meaning to what it is and understand what the subject is, or what's, you know, what's the main point, or what are the points that are being across, wanting emphasized, and just trying to understand and reorganizing my thoughts.
Good. That's great. That's really good strategy. I see in the chat, Anna says she color codes her notes, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, sometimes I do the same thing, and then I'll color code it, and right before a test, I'll review it. Probably like 20 minutes before I take a test.
Good. Yeah, that's awesome. Perfect. I love it. Okay. Now that I have that frame of reference, because some people don't take notes, I just wanted to know who I was talking to here. I want to pause and clarify a difference that I think is really interesting. So if you don't have a copy of the book that we gave out, so if you're in TRIO, you might have received it in our winter care package. If you're not in TRIO, you're welcome to stop by our office and pick one up while we still have them. It's a book called Effective Note-Taking by Dr. Fiona McPherson. There's a lot of helpful tips in there. She talks about making connections. She talks about highlighting. She talks about, you know, what effective strategies for note-taking are in general. It's a good book. I recommend it. But one of the things that she talks about that really stood out to me is this difference between note-taking and note-making. And I think that's really cool. So note-taking is kind of absorbing information. So you're sitting there in a lecture and you're jotting down notes, or you're reading a book and you're, you know, making notes on it. Note-making is kind of what Caesar was talking about, summarizing, restating it in your own words. It's manipulating it and doing things with it. It's preparing for a test or exams or essays, presentations, different things like that. It's a way for you to go through the notes and kind of interact with them and make new content out of it, or kind of restructure it. So I think this is pretty cool, because both of these are important, but a lot of students stop on the note-taking part and they don't move on to the note-making part. But this is where you're going to start to build those meaningful connections. So I want to ask as well, does anyone have a different strategy or approach that they take when they're taking notes from reading versus notes from lecture? Or do you even take notes from reading?
I do. I take notes. If I think it's important, I'll write something down just to keep that train of thought, and then later come back to it and kind of investigate it a little bit more and write a little bit more down. And like color code it just where like I'll redline it or something, and then I know I have to come back to that in a little bit and just kind of give myself a little more information on there, just so it's fresh in my mind, and then I'll review it throughout the week so that it stays fresh up to the test.
Awesome. And with the, is that mostly for notes that you take from the reading, or is it what you do with both of them?
I do, it depends on how important I feel the information is.
Okay. Yeah, that
But,
makes sense.
Sometimes the reading, I'll read a lot of stuff and a lot of it's instructions. So, sometimes I do, take notes on instructions because you navigate some pages a lot. So you kind of got to reference a little bit on instructions because sometimes I go back and forth.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you for sharing that with us.
You're welcome.
So I would say something to keep in mind is think about the types of notes you're taking and if they are effective. So like Caesar said, does it seem important? Is it worth taking notes on that thing? Because if you don't need to take notes on it, maybe don't emphasize it so much. So if you're taking notes during a class, your instructor is talking. And even if this is a recording, that's going to be moving a lot faster than if you are reading something at your own pace. So things are moving by quickly. They might not be quite as organized. Even some of the most organized instructors might have different tidbits of information that they're like, oh yeah, and they throw out something that was on a different topic. Or you might have a conversation in class that goes in a totally different direction, which is great information, but it's kind of moving off topic.
Right.
So when you're in a class, think about the notes that you're taking and how effective they are. Does your instructor provide slides, and are they reliable? Do they provide them before a lecture, or do you know you're going to get them immediately after? Do you have to wait a week for them to pop up on Canvas? If that information is keeping you from studying, then you probably want to write some of that information down. And are you copying down important information? So like Caesar was saying, is it worth copying down? Are you actively listening to what they're talking about? So instead of scribbling down every single thing they're saying, listen to what they're saying and try to pull out the important pieces of information. When you're reading, you have some time to kind of think about, you can read a paragraph and then think about, okay, what questions do you have about that paragraph or that section? How can you summarize what you just read? Same thing with notes later. So if you're reading your notes later, you can go back and go, okay, how can I summarize this? And when you're using those notes, think about where the gaps are. Are there things that you forgot or you didn't hear? You can talk to classmates, or maybe if it's a recorded lecture, you can watch it again and say like, oh wow, I totally missed this part of my notes. You can fill in those gaps. And then you interact with those notes, revisit them, rewrite them. And by rewriting, I don't mean copying them down again in prettier handwriting. I mean rephrasing it. What does it mean? How can you say it better? How can you say it in a way that you are going to understand for yourself? And then quizzing yourself. Use this information to do your own testing. So I want to take a pause for a moment here and talk about highlighting. When I'm talking about highlighting, I'm not necessarily saying, like with an actual highlighter. This can be circling things, underlining things, in some way, highlighting a piece of information to say this is important. So whatever methods you're using to highlight information, this can be really helpful. You can highlight info and facts and little pieces of information that you want to focus on. It's a way for you to, glance at it later and go, okay, I need these little pieces to remember and study. But it should have some kind of goal or focus behind it. Are you highlighting key terms, important people and phrases? And, you don't want to kind of just highlight everything because that's kind of pointless. If you're reading something that is just full of information, highlighting is probably not going to work out great for you. If you're highlighting more than, I would say maybe 10% of the page or so, then maybe you don't need to focus on highlighting unless you really find the act helpful. But for reviewing it later, if too much information is highlighted, like none of it's relevant. If everybody, if all the information is said to be important, then none of it's really important. And you want to make sure it's a thing that focuses your attention. So this is not very helpful if it's something that you already know. If you read a fact and you're like, yes, I'm excited because I'm smart and I know that. It doesn't really benefit you to highlight it because you already know it. So you don't need to go back to it. You might make a note or something, like use it as an anchor, but you don't necessarily need to highlight it and focus on it if you already know about it. And then I would say avoid overly complicated systems unless they really benefit you. So I love color coding. I love it. It makes me so happy. But I would always get into this habit where I would do it for the first week or two of a class, and then it would just taper off. You could see my notebook would be all coordinated and, beautiful and organized. And then the system kind of fell apart. And I felt like I was putting more work into trying to maintain the system than actually learning the material. So just keep in mind what your system is doing and if it's actually working for you. If color coding and organizing things in a certain way helps, then I'm all about it. I love organization. So if there are ways that you are working with your notes that work, that's fantastic. But don't force a system just because people use it. And if it's involving way too much work for you to maintain, then it's not really helping you out. So I'm not going to go into all of these. I will have them in the slides here, so you're welcome to look back at them. And mostly it's because this information is everywhere online. So if you've never heard of some of these note-taking methods, I do recommend looking into them because there's some cool benefits that you can look into. I have on the slides here my beautiful handwriting for all of you. But the one method I really want to highlight is the Cornell method. I'm not exaggerating when I say that this saved me in school. This was my saving grace. I use this all the time. My absolute favorite note-taking method. So basically the way that this works is you divide your page up. You have a small column here. I think it's supposed to be 2 inches or 2.5. And then a section on the bottom for summary. And then there's this big section here for your general notes. So during class, you take notes however you're taking notes. There's different methods, outlines, boxing, different things like I just mentioned. So however you take your notes, you do them in this section here. You probably need several pages and you just keep going. And then after class, you use this Q column over here to help you study. So you can write down key terms, vocabulary, think about questions. If maybe there's a big section here about the central nervous system, you could put central nervous system over here and then maybe ask yourself some questions about it. And then the idea is that you ideally fold this paper over. So you kind of make a fold around here, take the edge of it and fold it over so that you just see that Q column. And then if you need to look at answers, you can flip it open and look back. But this way you can kind of study just the cues that you've created for yourself. At the bottom here, you summarize your notes in your own words. It's a very helpful way to kind of break down everything that's on the page. So with all note-taking methods, I recommend making them work for you. If this doesn't work, when I was in college, I made lots of modifications to the Cornell method. Like I would put my summary at the end of a section instead of the end of every page because I have big handwriting. So it just didn't make sense for me. But if it makes sense for you, go for it. Basically take ownership of your notes in the way that you're doing them and make it work for you. So there's other ideas in here kind of to give you examples. Again, I'm not going to go into all these because they're readily available online and the slides are available for anybody who registered. So the boxing method's pretty cool. You create different topics and ideas, take down your notes in kind of sections and then box them up after. There's a charting method that can help you organize your ideas and thoughts. Again, this is one that you probably do not during class, but more afterward. Mind mapping, again, is kind of a nice way to visualize things. I think of it a lot like an outline, where you don't put a lot of information, but you kind of put key concepts and ideas and definitions and things like that. And it creates a nice visual. So you can see like, oh, this topic and this topic are, related because of this thing, or, this is all kind of tied together in this way. And then last, I want to mention the sentence or transcript method, mostly because a lot of students do this, and I was guilty of it too, but it's really not good. Basically, this is just copying down everything that's being said. So this works if you don't want to go to class that day, you don't want to be there, but you made yourself go anyway, you don't have it in you to focus, and you're just basically making a transcript so you can review it later. It's an option, and maybe you'll capture some good information, but it's not organized. You're gonna have to read through all of it again. So if you have a recorded lecture, especially, this is kind of a waste of time. And it's hard to pay attention while class is going on when you're just scribbling down everything that's being said and not focusing on important information. So I don't recommend it. There can be some benefits to it, maybe again, if you look around online, but a lot of students tend to do this. I do see it a lot, especially when you're starting out in school, because it's so much information and it's hard to know what's important. But don't make more work for yourself, especially if it's recorded, because you're just doubling down and doing the same thing again. So I'm actually going to skip this section because we already kind of talked about it, some note-taking techniques and things. But if you have ideas you want to add, go ahead and throw them in the Jamboard as well.
Sometimes I jot down information because it helps solidify the meaning. So it helps with me. That's the way I learn. I write it down, and it helps. For some reason, it helps just the information. I understand it better. So even if it's recording, I just jot down what I think it's important or what I want. For some reason, I'm able to retain it much better that way.
Yeah, definitely. And that's a good point, in that you are focusing on information that seems important to you.
Yes.
You're ideally not copying down every single word that's being said.
No, just that emphasized what it's most emphasized in that
Yeah.
in that lecture.
That can definitely help. It really, again, there's a lot of research. I don't have it in this presentation, but I can find it if anyone's interested. I know there's research out there that talks about the act of writing can really help you retain information better. It's a real thing. There's science behind it.
It helps retain.
Yeah, definitely. So taking notes, I'm not trying to say don't take notes during a recording, because definitely go for it. Just make sure your notes have meaning or seem important, which is what it sounds like you're doing, Maria.
Yes. Yeah.
Awesome.
I find it helpful to review notes like with somebody else, just to see if they caught anything that maybe I missed. So talking it out or processing like big concepts. For me, it's notes are one thing, but actually discussing it and applying, like, especially like big concepts of like theory or, stuff like that, where I'm like, did you catch all that? And just kind of going back and forth with somebody else will help me cover those parts that I may have skimmed.
100%. Yeah, definitely. This is one of the reasons that study groups are really helpful. And if you've never been in a study group and you feel intimidated by it, you can, sometimes there's discussion groups that you can use, or different resources you can, if you're in class, it's a little bit easier to be like, hey, this person I sit next to, we kind of chat. If you're doing things online, you could email other students. I know that feels weird, but in Canvas, if you are seeing somebody else who, is interactive and engaged, maybe you could message them and see if they're interested in being a study buddy. It doesn't hurt. And Sandra, you brought up a really great point. I know I used to compare notes all the time. Sometimes we would like physically trade notes. I would get to see how people organize what they thought was important versus what I thought was important. Usually those were different things. Most of the information would be the same, but those little gaps could sometimes be covered. Or maybe they understood a concept in a totally different way than I did. And we would talk it out, and maybe one of us was wrong, but that act of talking it out and explaining it and understanding it together really helped. So that's a really great point, Sandra. Thank you for bringing that up. All right, so this last section here, we're going to shift gears into talking about test anxiety. So test anxiety as an actual diagnosable thing is definitely very real. I don't know if any of you have felt any of these symptoms, but I know I have. when you're feeling anxious from a test, this is actually a type of performance anxiety. It might not feel like it, but this is the same kind of feeling that a lot of people get when they get stage fright or are nervous about giving presentations. Test anxiety is kind of the same package. It's all part of performance anxiety. So symptoms can include headaches. Those of us who get migraines know what this can feel like. Tension headaches are similar. Nausea, you might throw up or feel really nervous and upset to your stomach. Sweating, rapid heartbeat. Some people actually have full-fledged panic attacks and you feel like you're having a heart attack. It's very scary and very real. And there are also emotional parts to this. You might be afraid and you might try and talk yourself out of it, but you're still afraid. And even if there's not a logical reason, you might have negative thoughts going through your head, feeling like it's pointless. Maybe you just don't even go. Maybe you're so nervous about your test that you just think it's not worth it and you just don't. These are not good strategies, but that's something that a lot of people who experience test anxiety go through. So you can have minor versions of anxiety. You can be anxious about a test, but then there's the full-fledged test anxiety, which is kind of what I'm talking about right now. So reasons behind this, you can just be afraid of failing or not doing the perfect score that you want. Of course, a lack of preparedness. Maybe you didn't study, you didn't study, and that can really add a lot of anxiety. It might, that anxiety is there to try and help you do what's right and to study again in the future. That anxiety has a place, but that doesn't help you in the moment, right? It doesn't help you when you're going into that test. It doesn't feel good. You can be totally fine and feel like a pro at tests and have one really bad test that can make you very anxious moving forward. I know I've had that experience. You can go into it feeling super confident or just maybe not even feeling confident. You just go into it and bomb it, or it surprises you, or any of these things in test performance, and it can have an impact on you. Maybe you're feeling pressure. Maybe you need to keep up your GPA because you're on, financial aid warning, or your parents have high expectations, or you have high expectations of yourself. There's lots of pressures that can kind of add to this. And for some people, perfectionism is a big deal. Like I was saying, not just fear of failure, but fear of not getting 100% and not doing the perfect, messing up your 4.0 or something like that. So if you experience anxiety, whether it's full-fledged diagnosable test anxiety, or maybe just some anxiety around testing in general, there's lots of things that you can do. And one of the best, of course, is practice effective studying techniques. This is the best preventative because you're going to feel prepared and knowledgeable. So even if you're nervous, you have that information ingrained in your head, and you know what you're talking about. Self-testing is a big part of that too, especially if you can mimic the environment that you're going to be testing in. So if you are taking tests in a classroom, maybe go to the library or somewhere on campus, somewhere that's similar, sitting out, around other students, but where everybody's quiet. It's kind of a similar vibe. If you're taking tests at home, do tests in the same spot. Self-test yourself where you study and where you do all those things. Keep your environment very similar so it gives you cues to kind of put you in the right mindset. If you feel comfortable doing so, you can communicate your anxiety with your instructor. That doesn't mean they're not going to make you take tests, but they might be more understanding, right? They might give you some tips or suggestions, or help you kind of work through that anxiety one way or another. And occasionally, if you are nervous about what they think of you, this will help with that too. So if one of those things is you're afraid of how you look and what the instructor will think of you if you don't get a perfect grade, if you talk to your instructor about it, then they'll, kind of get that feeling and awareness that you're not just that letter grade, you're a person, and that can help you with your own anxiety. I know that everyone says this, but take care of yourself. Don't underestimate sleep. It's really easy to stay up late cramming for a test. Sometimes it feels necessary, but sleep is one of the very best things you can do to retain information for your memory. Again, there's lots of research on this. I'm not going to bog you down with it, but if you want help finding it, I'm here to help. But sleeping, super important. Eating well, getting exercise, staying hydrated, all this stuff that you should do, but maybe don't. Just try and make yourself do it a bit more around test time. And of course, you might be feeling anxious because you need some accommodations. So there's nothing wrong with getting accommodations, and I highly recommend reaching out to do so if you think that you might meet some standards to do that. So if you have a diagnosable learning disability or otherwise need accommodations, I strongly urge you to take advantage of them. Usually it's just a little bit extra time to take your tests. Sometimes there are different things, but that's kind of the general thing that happens. And then of course, speak with a counselor. If you're feeling legitimate anxiety and you're really stressed, you don't even have to be really stressed. Just talk to a counselor. The biggest thing I hear all the time when people tell me they don't want to go to counseling is that they're just going to tell me what I already know. And I can relate to that. I know how that feels. But often that's not the case. Sometimes they validate how you feel. Sometimes they give you tools and suggestions. They're not talking down to you. They know you're a human being. They know that you're smart. They just want to give you tools. So you might be surprised. And even if they do tell you things you already know, they're not going to do it in a way that feels like a waste of your time. They're going to give you tools and resources to, build confidence and move forward. So regardless of whether you experience test anxiety or not, there are some things you can do during a test to kind of help you center yourself and focus. So mindfulness, like we talked about at the beginning, just take a minute to take a few deep breaths and focus on your environment or the breathing or, the way the pencil feels in your hand, something that you can focus on for a moment. One good exercise is to kind of tighten everything and then relax all your muscles, because this makes you aware of how much you were tightening, your shoulders and things like that. I don't know if you ever see, if you're scrolling through, Twitter or whatever, and they'll say like, hey, unclench your jaw and drink some water. And I'm always like, oh, whatever. But usually when they do that, I'm like, okay, well, I've been hunching my shoulders for I don't know how long. Sit up straight, kind of correct yourself. Stretching before you go into the test, kind of do a little neck thing, make yourself feel comfortable. Close your eyes and count to 10. This gives you a distraction to really calm down. It's again, a kind of stereotypical thing, but it works. And focus on your thoughts and emotions. Are you thinking negative things? If you are, you don't have to say like, oh, it's stupid, stop thinking these things. Acknowledge them, that you feel a certain way, but just let them go. I like to visualize that they're in a bubble and they just kind of float away from me. And then reassure yourself. Like if you don't know the answer to a question, that's okay. You'll know an answer to a different question. Maybe this question will come back to you. It's not the end of the world. Move on. And manage your expectations. Like we were saying about perfectionism, expecting a perfect grade is probably going to add a lot of extra pressure. Doesn't mean you can't have high expectations of yourself, but understand that you're a human being and it's okay to not be perfect all the time. So during a test, arrive early. If you are doing a test at home, take a few minutes before you begin the test to make sure that everything's where it should be. Get yourself a glass of water, prepare everything, make sure it's quiet, the environment that you need. Focus on your feelings. Take that mindfulness practice when you get into the test. Thoroughly read those instructions and listen to the prompts that are given. And if you are sitting there in the hall or, before a test doing this thing where you're memorizing all these facts and trying to recite them to yourself, if you have the opportunity, just do a data dump. Like all the facts that you're holding on to, just write them down somewhere on scratch paper or the back of a test. And then that way you don't have to hold on to them. They're not, on your mind. You can just refer back to them. If you don't know the answer to a question, skip it. Come back to it. If you can write on a test or mark it, I know in Canvas there's a little flag next to them you can click to mark them. Mark it and come back. I do recommend making sure that you have time to come back though. And answer all the questions, even if you don't know the answer, unless you're told that you're going to be penalized. In my entire education, I've only had one teacher who penalized for wrong answers. So it's pretty rare. If you have no idea, just guess and make the best guess you can. But, some answer is better than no answer. And for short answer questions, if you provide some answer, they might give you partial credit. So multiple choice strategies, read everything that's being asked, read the actual question, make sure you understand the actual question, read all of the possible answers before you pick one. If more than one of the answers seems correct, is there one that's more correct? And then if not, if you're reading these and you find a couple that really seem like they're correct, go back and reread the question, because maybe they're asking about a negative. Maybe they're saying which one's not correct or something like that. Pay attention to words that are like always and never, because they're often not the right answer. Again, often not the right answer, not never the right answer. Look for spelling mistakes. This is kind of a fallback if you really don't know the answer. Instructors are going to proofread most of the time. And usually when they're proofreading and reviewing, they're focusing on the question and the right answer. So if there's a spelling mistake, there's a good chance it's not the right answer. It's not always true, but it's a way to kind of make that guess. And then just making that educated guess the best you can. So here's an example of a multiple choice question. Main value of taking notes is to provide a written record to help you organize your material, to provide a verbatim record to help you understand the material, and to help you put the information in your own words in a way that helps you understand it. So when I read this, I want to stop at D and say, yeah, it's to help me understand the material. But E is a more correct answer because it's putting it in your own words in a way that helps you understand it. So that doesn't mean that D is wrong, but this answer is more correct. So this is what I mean when I say read all the answers and think about which one's more correct. For short answer questions, make sure you understand what the question's actually asking you to do. Is it asking for you to provide a definition, to explain how things relate to each other, compare, contrast? There's lots of different things that it could be asking you, and make sure you understand what they're actually wanting. And if you don't, ask your instructor for clarification. Does it list a specific unit or thing that you should be including? Because that can be worth a lot of points, especially in math. If you were measuring something in feet, make sure you put that feet at the end. Does the question have more than one question embedded in it? Sometimes you'll have questions that have a couple questions in them. So make sure you're answering all the parts to it. Answer the question that's being asked and keep it concise. It's a short answer. You don't have to, dump everything you know about that subject because that kind of hides the correct answer and makes it harder for the reviewer to grade it. So just answer the question they're asking. And don't leave it blank. Again, I know it's harder with a short answer question, but if you run into a situation where you really don't know, maybe then that's a time to just put down the information you do know. And then of course, budget your time. That's the same with any test. Pay attention to how much time you have. And if you're spending way too much time on a short answer question, maybe move on, and maybe you're putting too much work into it. So an example, again, I just go back to my own history. So sorry if this goes weird, but maybe if an instructor asked you how the CNS and PNS are different. So if you're in a neuroscience class or even just psychology, you might go, okay, central nervous system, peripheral. The question is just, how are they different? You don't need to tell everything about all of these different systems. In this example, I just gave a 2-sentence answer. Here's the difference between them. So the last thing is essays. This is everybody's favorite, right? Make sure you read the question carefully and actually focus on what they're asking. I recommend when you're reading things to mark keywords. What are important things that they're asking for? Are they asking for a certain topic or certain phrases? If you kind of highlight or underline or make sure that you understand. What are they asking you? Or do they want you to give an opinion about something? Or are they asking you to argue a point, to recall facts, to read somebody else's argument and provide a response? Make sure you understand what they're actually asking. Because if they're asking you for an opinion, then you should be giving an opinion, right? Not just stating facts. If they're asking you to argue a point, then they don't want to know just what you think. They want you to support that point somehow and make an actual argument. How long should the answer be? Are they telling you? Does your instructor have a rule that typically everything should be at least a page? If you don't know, how much time are you being given? Is this a reasonable amount of time? Are you being tested? If it's like only 50 minutes to write an essay, keep that in mind because you probably won't have time to write like a really elaborate one. Stay on topic. Focus on what you're actually supposed to be talking about. And to do that, forming a thesis statement or a topic sentence. Basically, this is what I'm talking about today. a statement that just kind of summarizes everything or the point that you're making. And then reread the question and your answer to make sure you actually answered it. So all of these tips and advice are for during the test, but afterward is important too. It's easy to just walk out of the room or close the computer and just breathe a sigh of relief and be done and move on with your life. But if you want to actually use this information, especially if it's in the middle of a quarter and not just a final, then there are some important things that you can do. You can write down anything you didn't know. And this includes things that you guessed on. If you made a multiple choice question and you just guessed, write down, I don't know what this is, or, whatever guess you had. And then think about the challenges that you overcame. So kind of a positive spin, like, hey, I did it. I showed up to the test. I am done with it. I'm going to go do whatever my little reward thing is for myself and move on. But making sure that you keep that information with you. And then when you get your grade or the feedback for it, focus on the positives. What did you learn from this? So if you got a really bad grade, what can you learn from this? What do you know now about how the instructor grades? What do you know now about how these questions are asked and how to answer them? What questions did you get wrong? Why did you get them wrong? Is it because you didn't know, or because you were stressed, or you didn't read it right? Focus on, kind of what the reason was there. And then again, those guesses. This is the thing that always hung me up. And I know a lot of my friends too. You make a guess and you get it right, you never know. And then if that question shows up again on a final, you might still not know and not know what you guessed. So that's kind of why I mentioned write down things you didn't know so that you can study them. Even if you guess right and you get a good grade, kind of solidify that information, because you could end up getting that question wrong if you get it again. So we're going to skip this one too. Again, the Jamboard's open. You kind of know some of your test taking strategies, but I want to shift gears to the end here and ask you to please complete our brief evaluation form. It's really, when I say brief, I mean brief. I want your name, email address, what describes you. Are you a freshman, sophomore, running start, graduating soon, not enrolled, things like that. What's something you learned? And what's something you wish we covered in more detail? And are you currently in TRIO? That's it. And just submit. So we'll get this in the chat here. And while I'm putting that in the chat, for those of you who aren't in TRIO, I would love to hand over to Sandra if you're up for it.
Yeah.
To kind of tell a little bit about the program.
All right. So I do see some TRIO faces here, but I am going to present a little bit of information for students who are not familiar with our program. So my name is Sandra Villarreal. I'm the director for TRIO Student Support Services here at Wenatchee Valley College. And this presentation that was awesome and packed full of great information was presented by our retention specialist, Jenna Floyd. So you might be thinking, well, what is TRIO? TRIO is a program that's been here at WVC since 2015, and every year we serve 140 WVC students. So our purpose here is to help students persist, which means to stay in school, graduate from WVC, and transfer into a bachelor's program. So if you have a high school diploma or GED and are a US citizen or resident, since we are federally funded, you're eligible to apply. We also have some additional eligibility requirements, but those are the first two. Go ahead. So a part of our core services are academic support, financial literacy, career planning, and transfer assistance. And how we provide those services is sitting down and helping you create an academic plan. So you meet with your retention specialist or your TRIO advisor, and you check out the classes, thinking about the classes that you want to take, and then planning those out for the next quarter or the next year or the next 2 years, so that we can map out a plan for you that's going to work. We provide academic workshops such as these every month. And so we provide those to our TRIO students, and then every quarter we try to make those available for the entire campus. We have mentoring opportunities where students can be paired with another student and kind of get some more additional guidance. And then we also have a TRIO tutor who can help with homework assistance. Students who are in the TRIO program also qualify for priority registration, which means that they're able to register for their classes a little bit ahead of time and make sure that they get in those classes that they need. And then we also have a lending library as one of the resources for TRIO students. So students can check out or borrow books for the quarter. And if we don't have those books in our lending library, then we are able to purchase some of those books. The idea is that other students you'll return those books at the end of the quarter and other students will be able to check them out. As far as transfer assistance, you meet with your advisor and we kind of map out your timeline and then help you through the process of applying for transfer, or applying for acceptance into the university, identifying programs, looking at the majors and looking at the resources that are available there at the next campus. Financial literacy, we help a lot of the students with identifying scholarships and then also applying for scholarships, making sure that you have completed your FAFSA or if you need assistance in completing your FAFSA, and then career planning. So just making sure that the classes that you're taking now are going to be relevant to the career goals that you have for yourself. So, you know, helping you develop some of those networking opportunities, learning about internships, some advising about careers, and just making sure that when you pursue your degree at the university, you're also thinking about what you want to do long-term. So our core services here through TRIO is really just meant to prepare you for the next step, and the skills that you learn with us here at WBC can be transferred over to university and possibly even onto your career. That's the hope. So we welcome you. Oh, sorry, I'm just gonna just welcome you to check out our website. If you have any questions, you have our phone number, our website, and our email to reach out to us. And we are here in Mish-E Twi, the new building here on campus. Our office number is 1221. So we're on the second floor at the very end of the hallway under the success sign. So that should be a cue to our attention for you as well. I'll hand it back to Jenna, sorry.
No, it's fine. So just kind of wrapping up, for those of you who are interested in research and things, there are some references here. So, you know, you can always look these things up later, or if you ever want to reach out, I'm happy to talk about some of that stuff if you have questions. But before we wrap up today, does anybody have any questions for me now?
Yes, is there a way that you can provide access to that PowerPoint, the testing strategies? I can review it.
Yep, absolutely. Anybody who registered, I'll send it out. We'll send out a recording and then we'll send out the slides as well. And then of course, because you are in TRIO, we'll also have it on Canvas for you.
Thank you.
You're welcome. I also want to say, so here's the copy of the book I was talking about. We didn't necessarily talk a ton about it, but there were sections in here that she goes more in depth than I did in some things like making connections and things like that. Sandra brings up a really good point in the chat. We do have note-taking pads that are already, you know, established. I believe they're Cornell. Is that right, Sandra? So they're already laid out. So you can just come pick some up if you're interested, if you kind of want to try it out and don't want to do the work of drawing on the lines yourself. We have some of those.
And if you're feeling extra scholarly, we have Post-it notes and highlighters to also kind of reignite that that motivation to get organized and study for your upcoming test, or even get prepared for next quarter.
And note cards.
And note cards.
And we also have stress balls and fidget cubes. So we got lots of stuff. If you didn't get some of these things, if you're in TRIO, if you didn't get them in the winter welcome box, stop by. We got them here. If you're not in TRIO, you can still come get a copy of the book. You can pick up a stress ball or a fidget cube as long as we have some left. Again, we're in Mish-E Twi on the second floor. All right, well, I'm gonna hang out for a couple of minutes here, but if nobody has questions, we'll go ahead and wrap up. Otherwise, you know, I'll be here if you have questions for me, and you can always email us or reach out.
Yeah, and I just want to acknowledge students who participated today. So yeah, thanks for showing up. This is a big step, so thank you.